Emma never expected her routine breast cancer screening to change her life forever. But when she meets Dr. Liam Carter, a young, handsome millionaire with a heart of gold, her world turns upside down. As emotions intensify, love blooms unexpectedly. Can she embrace love, or will her fears push him away? A life-changing appointment. Emma Parker sat on the worn-out couch in her small apartment, gripping the hem of her sweater as she stared at the email on her phone. Appointment confirmed. Dr. Liam Carter, specialist in oncology. Monday, 10 a.m. Her heart pounded. It wasn't the appointment itself that terrified her, though the thought of a breast cancer screening made her hands clammy. It was the possibility of bad news. She had lost her mother to cancer at 15. The memories were like scars that never faded. Her mother's frail body, the countless hospital visits, the silent tears she shed every night. And now, at 24, she faced the same terrifying possibility. For weeks she had felt a small lump in her chest. At first she ignored it, convincing herself it was nothing, but the thought haunted her in the quiet hours of the night, filling her with a fear so strong she couldn't breathe. Now, the appointment was set. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to push away the anxiety threatening to consume her. "It's just a checkup," she whispered. "Maybe it's nothing." But deep inside, a whisper of fear replied, "What if it's not?" The hospital visit Monday morning arrived, and Emma felt like she was walking towards her doom. Dressed in a simple beige sweater and jeans, she kept her head low, avoiding eye contact with the bustling world outside. The hospital was a grand building with tall glass windows and sleek white walls, a place that smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. She approached the reception, barely able to speak. Emma Parker. "I have an appointment with Dr. Carter," she mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. The receptionist gave her a kind smile. "Dr. Carter's office is on the 3rd floor. You may take the elevator." Emma nodded quickly and stepped away, her heart pounding as she made her way toward the elevator. Each step felt heavy. She had expected an older doctor, someone with gray hair and a serious face, someone who would see her as just another patient, another chart to review. But she wasn't prepared for him. Dr. Liam Carter, the unexpected doctor. As she entered the consultation room, she froze. Standing before her was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp white coat. He was young, shockingly young, maybe in his early 30s. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled, and his sharp blue eyes held a depth that made her breath hitch. He looked like he had stepped out of a high society magazine, a man who belonged in expensive suits at charity galas, not in a hospital examining room. For a moment she thought she had walked into the wrong office. "Miss Parker." His voice was deep, smooth, and strangely comforting. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Yes." Liam smiled, a small reassuring curve of his lips. "You look nervous. I promise, you're in good hands." She nodded quickly but kept her gaze down, too shy to meet his piercing eyes. Liam studied her for a moment, sensing her unease. He had met plenty of nervous patients before, but something about her shyness was different. She wasn't just afraid of the appointment, she seemed afraid of being seen. "Why don't you take a seat?" he said gently. Emma hesitated before sitting down, gripping the edge of the chair. Liam took her file and skimmed through it. "I see you've come for a breast cancer screening. Have you noticed any symptoms?" Emma nodded, feeling her heart pound. "A lump. I don't know if it's serious." Liam's gaze softened. He could hear the fear in her voice, see the tension in her fingers as she twisted them together. "We'll take a look," he said in a voice so calm and reassuring that for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. His presence was strangely soothing, like a steady anchor in the middle of a storm. As he explained the screening procedure, his voice was gentle and patient. He didn't rush her, he made her feel safe. And Emma, who had always been terrified of hospitals, found herself hanging on to his every word. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of something far greater than a routine checkup. A touch that changed everything. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she followed Dr. Liam Carter's instructions. The air in the consultation room felt heavy, filled with her fear and his calm presence. Liam's blue eyes held no judgment, only quiet reassurance. I know this can be overwhelming, but I promise you're not alone in this. His words, so simple yet so profound, sent a strange warmth through Emma's chest. She had always been alone in her struggles. After her mother passed away, she had learned to bury her fears, her emotions, her pain, because there was no one to share them with. But now there was a stranger, a doctor, a man who exuded both power and kindness, looking at her as if she mattered. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. Emma nodded, even though she wasn't. Liam guided her through the examination, his voice steady, his movements professional. Yet there was something different about him, something that made Emma feel seen, understood. She flinched slightly when his fingers brushed over her skin during the medical assessment. His touch was warm, careful, respectful. "Relax," he murmured, noticing the tension in her shoulders. "I promise, I'll be as gentle as possible." His voice alone had a strange effect on her. It melted away the cold fear inside her, replacing it with something unfamiliar, something she couldn't name. Her heartbeat was erratic, but not just from anxiety anymore. Why was she suddenly so aware of him? The way his sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms. The way his face held a mix of concentration and concern. The unspoken understanding. After the screening, Liam took a step back, his eyes locked onto hers. "The results will take a few days, but based on what I felt, I believe it's nothing too concerning. We'll run further tests just to be sure." Emma exhaled slowly, the weight in her chest easing just a little. Thank you," she whispered. Liam hesitated before speaking, his gaze softening. "I meant what I said earlier, Emma. You're not alone in this." She stiffened slightly. How did he know? How did he see through her so easily? She wasn't just afraid of cancer, she was afraid of being vulnerable. But Liam, he spoke as if he understood, as if he had been in that darkness before. As Emma stepped outside, the cool hospital air greeted her, but her mind was far from clear. Her heartbeat was still erratic, not because of the appointment, but because of him. She tried to push the thoughts away, but his deep voice echoed in her mind, his touch still imprinted on her skin, his kindness lingering in her heart. Meanwhile, back in his office, Liam Carter leaned against his desk, running a hand through his hair. He had seen thousands of patients before. He had comforted many women during similar appointments. But Emma Parker was different. There was something in her eyes, in her quiet strength, in her unspoken loneliness, that had stirred something deep inside him. He didn't know what it was yet. But one thing was certain, this wasn't the last time he would be seeing her, and neither of them were ready for what was coming next. "Would you like me to continue with part 3 now?" "You said Ebb is K, part 3 K, expand Caro." With deep emotions, romance and engagement, ChatGPT said. Part 3, a bond that shouldn't exist. Emma walked out of the hospital doors, but she wasn't the same girl who had walked in. Something inside her had changed, or maybe it had awakened. She touched her chest lightly, where Liam's hands had carefully examined her. It was meant to be a medical procedure, but why did his touch linger like a soft memory? She shook her head. No, she couldn't allow herself to think this way. Dr. Liam Carter was a professional, a man of wealth, influence and power, and she was just Emma, a shy girl who worked a simple job and lived a simple life. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She needed to forget about him. But even as she told herself that, his deep voice echoed in her mind. "You're not alone in this." Those words, they had unraveled her completely. Liam's restlessness, back in his office, Liam Carter sat behind his desk, staring at Emma Parker's file. He had done thousands of examinations before. It should have been just another appointment. But it wasn't. She wasn't. Liam wasn't a man who let emotions interfere with his work. He was a doctor. He had spent years building a reputation, one that went beyond his last name and family wealth. Yet for the first time in years, he felt distracted. Emma had been so fragile, yet so strong. Her shyness wasn't just social anxiety, it was a shield, one she had built around herself, and when she had looked at him, it was like she didn't expect kindness from anyone. That thought unsettled him. Who had hurt her? Why did she seem so afraid of being seen? He didn't know why it mattered to him, but it did. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe she was just another patient, and this strange feeling would fade. But deep down something told him it wouldn't. An unexpected call. 2 days later, Emma was at work, trying and failing to focus. She worked as a bookshop assistant, one of the few places where she felt safe. She loved books because they never judged, never asked questions. Unlike Liam Carter, just the thought of him sent a shiver down her spine. She was lost in thought when her phone vibrated. Her heart stopped when she saw the name. Dr. Liam Carter. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Why was he calling? Was something wrong? Taking a deep breath, she answered. Hello, Emma." His deep voice came through, calm yet firm. "I have your results. Everything looks fine. There's no sign of cancer." Her shoulders slumped in relief. She had been holding on to fear for so long. She almost forgot what it felt like to breathe freely. But then Liam's voice softened. "But I'd still like you to come in for a follow-up, just to be sure." Emma hesitated. She knew what a follow-up meant. It wasn't necessary if everything was fine. So why was he asking her to come back? "I don't think that's needed, Dr. Carter. You just said I'm fine." There was a pause. Then his next words sent her heart racing. "Come anyway, Emma." The meeting that changed everything. Emma stood outside Liam's office, her palms sweating. She had almost convinced herself not to come, but something in his voice had pulled her here. She knocked softly. "Come in." She stepped inside, and for the first time she saw Liam Carter without his white coat. He was wearing a navy blue shirt, the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong arms. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run his fingers through it one too many times. And when he looked at her, there was something different in his eyes, something warmer. "I didn't expect you to come," he admitted, his lips curving slightly. Emma fidgeted. "You asked me to." He studied her for a moment, before leaning against his desk, crossing his arms. "I told you I'd like you to come in, but I wasn't sure if you'd actually listen." Emma swallowed. Was he teasing her? She had never had a man look at her like this before, especially not a man like him. "Why did you call me back?" she finally asked, her voice soft. Liam hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know." Her eyes widened. "What?" He let out a small chuckle. "You caught me off guard, Emma." She blinked. "I did." He nodded. "I meet hundreds of patients, but something about you, I can't get it out of my head." Her breath hitched. What was he saying? Was this some kind of joke? Why would a man like him, young, rich, successful, be thinking about her? Emma took a step back, shaking her head. "Dr. Carter, Liam." She froze. He was looking at her so intently, like he could see straight through her. "Call me Liam." Her pulse raced. This wasn't normal. This wasn't professional. This was dangerous. But why did it feel so right? Their worlds were different. They weren't meant to collide. And yet they already had. And nothing would ever be the same again. Emma's breath hitched. "Call me Liam." The way he said it, so smooth, so direct, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. She shouldn't be here. She shouldn't feel this way. This wasn't just her doctor. This was Liam Carter, a young millionaire, a man completely out of her league. And yet in this moment, he wasn't speaking like a doctor. He was speaking like a man drawn to her in a way she couldn't understand. She swallowed hard and shook her head. "I don't think that's appropriate." Liam tilted his head slightly, his blue eyes studying her. "And why not?" Emma blinked. Was he serious? "Because you're my doctor," she said firmly, forcing herself to look anywhere but at his intense gaze. A slow, amused smile tugged at Liam's lips. "That's temporary." She froze. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It means, Emma, that I don't see you as just a patient anymore." Her heart slammed against her ribs. No, this wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She had spent her whole life avoiding attention, staying in the background, hiding from anything that felt too big, too overwhelming. And now, here she was, standing in front of a man who could ruin everything she had built to protect herself. The fire between them. Emma took a shaky step back. I should go. Liam's jaw tightened. He didn't want to let her leave. He had never been the type to pursue someone, but Emma was different. There was something about her shyness, her vulnerability, her quiet strength, something that called to him in a way he couldn't explain. And she was running. He took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. Why are you afraid of me? His voice was low, almost a whisper. Emma's eyes darted up to his, her entire body betraying her. She could feel the heat of him, the undeniable tension pulling them closer. I'm not afraid of you, she whispered, but even she didn't believe it. Liam's gaze softened. Then what is it? Emma clenched her fists, fighting the emotions building inside her. It's not you, she admitted. It's me. I don't fit into your world. Liam frowned. Who told you that? She swallowed. It's just the truth. I'm not the kind of girl that men like you notice. Something in Liam's eyes darkened. Men like me, he echoed, his voice dangerously low. Emma shivered. You think I care about what society expects, about what the world thinks is appropriate? He took another step forward, and now, he was close enough that she could feel his breath on her skin. Emma, he murmured, his voice laced with something deep, something intoxicating. You are the only thing I've been thinking about since you walked into my office. Her heart stopped. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. And yet, she felt it. The way his presence wrapped around her, pulled her in like gravity. The way her body responded to him, despite every logical thought telling her to run. Tell me you don't feel this, Liam whispered, and I'll let you go. Emma's lips parted, her breathing ragged. She should say it. She should tell him she felt nothing, that he was just her doctor, that he meant nothing to her. But the words wouldn't come, because it would be a lie, and he knew it. Liam's gaze flickered to her lips, for just a second, so quick, so subtle, but she saw it, and her entire body burned. This was dangerous. This was wrong. But dear God, she wanted him to kiss her. The air between them was electric. And then, his phone rang. A moment left hanging. The sudden sound shattered the tension like glass. Emma jumped back, as if she had been burned. Liam closed his eyes for a brief second before sighing, and reaching into his pocket. She took the chance to step away, to put distance between them, before she lost herself completely. He answered the call, his expression shifting into something unreadable. She swallowed, trying to steady her heart. I should go, she stammered. Liam glanced at her, his blue eyes still burning with something unspoken. But he didn't stop her, maybe because he knew this wasn't over. A night of restlessness. Emma barely slept that night. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment in his office. The way his voice had dipped when he said her name. The way his gaze had flickered to her lips, as if he wanted, no needed, to kiss her. She had never felt this way before. She had never wanted someone so deeply, so achingly, and it terrified her. Meanwhile, across town, Liam Carter sat in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline. He had always been a man of control, but tonight, he felt completely out of control, because all he could think about was her. Emma Parker, the girl who had walked into his office as a patient, and had somehow become so much more. And no matter how much he tried to fight it, no matter how many times he told himself to let her go, he already knew he wouldn't, because she was already his, even if she didn't know it yet. Emma tried to go back to her normal life after that night, but something had changed. She felt restless, unsettled. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Liam's piercing blue gaze, the intensity of his words, the unspoken tension between them. It was maddening. She had spent her life hiding, avoiding attention, keeping herself small, and yet, in the span of days, Liam Carter had shattered all of that. She didn't belong in his world. He was rich, powerful, confident, everything she wasn't. So why did it feel like he saw her? Really saw her? And why did that terrify her so much? The unexpected invitation. Emma was at her tiny apartment, curled up on the couch with a book, when her phone buzzed. She frowned at the unknown number, before hesitantly picking up. Hello, Emma. Her heart stopped. She would recognize that deep, smooth voice anywhere. Liam, she breathed, a soft chuckle. You sound surprised. She was. She never gave him her number.
Yeah, how did you get my...
I have my ways, he said, amusement lacing his tone. Emma shook her head, her nerves prickling. This wasn't right. He shouldn't be calling her. Why are you calling? She asked, gripping the edge of her blanket. A brief pause. Then, I want to see you. Her breath caught in her throat. Liam, we can't, she whispered. Why not? His voice was gentle, but firm, challenging her. Because I'll fall, because I already am. But she couldn't say that. She closed her eyes. Because it's inappropriate. Liam let out a slow exhale. Emma, I know what's going through your mind. But just listen to me. Please. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Just one dinner, he said softly. Not as your doctor, just as me. Her chest ached. She should say no. She should stop this before it went too far. But when she opened her mouth, the word that left her lips was, okay. A night unlike any other. Emma stood in front of the restaurant, staring at the glass doors with her heart pounding. She had spent an hour convincing herself not to come. Yet, here she was, dressed in a simple navy blue dress, her hair falling in soft waves. She felt different, a little braver, a little bolder. She took a deep breath and walked in, and then she saw him. Liam sat at a private table, dressed in a sleek black button-down, the top two buttons undone. He looked effortlessly handsome, devastatingly confident, and when he looked up and saw her, his entire face changed. Ian baby and Dumby. His usual guarded expression melted into something softer, something raw. He stood up immediately. Emma. Just the way he said her name made her knees weak. She swallowed and forced herself to walk over. You came, he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her like she was something rare. She nodded. I did. A slow, breathtaking smile touched his lips, and just like that, she was ruined. The dinner that changed everything. They talked about things she never expected. Liam didn't just talk about himself, he asked about her. Really asked. Her childhood, her dreams, her fears, and for the first time in years, Emma let someone in. I used to love painting, she admitted, stirring her drink. Liam leaned forward, intrigued. Used to, she gave a small, sad smile. Life got in the way. His jaw clenched. I hate that, he murmured. Emma blinked. What? That life took something from you, he said simply. Something you loved. Her chest tightened. She had never heard anyone say that before. Never had anyone care like that. She looked at him, really looked at him. And she realized this wasn't just attraction. This was something deeper, something dangerous. The moment they couldn't stop, by the time they left the restaurant, the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Liam walked her to her car, his movements slower, more deliberate, and when she turned to say goodbye, he was right there, standing too close, close enough to touch. Emma's breath came shallow. He reached up slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered, his touch sending fire through her veins. Her lips parted, his gaze flickered down, and in that moment, she knew he was going to kiss her, and she was going to let him. Her heart pounded, her entire body begging for it. Liam leaned in, his lips just inches from hers, and then she panicked. She took a step back, shaking her head. I have to go. Liam's jaw tensed, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Emma, he murmured. She didn't let him finish. She turned, opened her car door, and escaped, because if she had stayed even a second longer, she would have let herself fall. and that was the one thing she wasn't ready for. A man who wouldn't give up. Liam watched her drive away, frustration burning in his chest. She was running from him. Again. But this time, he wasn't going to let her. He had seen it in her eyes. She felt this just as much as he did, and no matter how much she tried to fight it, this wasn't over. Not even close. Emma spent the next few days trying to convince herself that walking away from Liam had been the right choice, but her heart refused to listen. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, the way his voice softened when he said her name, the way his touch had set her skin on fire. She had never felt this way before, and that terrified her. She wasn't the kind of woman who got swept up in fairy tales. Liam Carter was a man way out of her league, a man who had no business looking at someone like her the way he did. So why was he still chasing her? A surprise at the clinic. Emma was sitting in the waiting area at the hospital, flipping through a magazine, when she felt it. That unmistakable presence. Her pulse jumped. Slowly she looked up, and there he was. Liam stood at the reception desk, talking to one of the nurses. He was dressed in a crisp white coat today, his sharp features unreadable, his broad shoulders making him look even more intimidating. Emma tried to pretend she wasn't staring, tried to pretend she wasn't affected, but then his gaze flicked up and locked onto hers. Her breath caught. For a long, tense moment, they just stared. Then slowly, deliberately, Liam started walking toward her. Each step felt like a challenge. By the time he reached her, Emma's heart was pounding. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low. Emma swallowed. "No, I." Liam tilted his head, his gaze never wavering. "Don't lie," he murmured. She bit her lip, looking away. "It's just this isn't right, Liam." His jaw clenched. "Why not?" She blinked. "You're my doctor." "Not anymore." His voice was firm. "I transferred your case." Emma's head snapped up in shock. "What?" Liam's expression softened. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, Emma, but I also don't want you running from this." Her chest ached. He made it sound so easy, like all she had to do was let go of her fears. But he didn't understand. She wasn't the kind of woman a man like him should fall for. So why did it feel like he already had? A confession under the stars. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Liam's words replayed in her mind, making her restless. So she did something she hadn't done in years. She grabbed her old paintbrushes and a blank canvas, setting up by the window. The moonlight spilled into her tiny apartment, and before she knew it, her hands were moving. Brush to canvas, stroke after stroke, she lost herself in the colors, in the feeling of creating something beautiful. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. A soft knock at her door startled her. She frowned, setting down the brush. It was almost midnight. "Who?" She opened the door, and froze. Liam stood there. His white shirt was slightly undone, his hair a little messy, like he had been running his hands through it, and his eyes. They looked different tonight, more vulnerable. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted. Emma's stomach flipped. "Liam, I don't care how complicated this is," he said, stepping closer. "I don't care what rules we're supposed to follow. All I know is that I can't get you out of my head." Her pulse raced. "You're just saying that." "I'm not." Liam reached out, gently brushing a paint smudge from her cheek. His touch was warm, grounding. "I know you're scared, Emma. I know you think we don't make sense." She swallowed hard. "But tell me one thing," he whispered. "When you're with me, do you feel it too?" Her chest tightened. Because yes, she felt it. She felt it. So much it hurt, but admitting that meant surrendering. And she wasn't sure she was ready for that. So instead, she did the one thing she had always done. She stepped back. "I need time," she whispered. Liam's jaw tensed, but he nodded. "I'll wait," he said, his voice unwavering. Then he turned and walked away, and Emma was left standing there, heart in her throat, tears in her eyes, because deep down, she knew, she was already his. Haunted by his words, Emma didn't sleep that night. Liam's voice echoed in her mind. I'll wait. Why did those words feel so heavy, so raw? She had spent her whole life building walls around her heart, convincing herself that love, real love, was not meant for someone like her. Yet Liam had torn through those walls, like they were made of paper, and she was terrified. She stood by the window, staring at the painting she had started the night before. It was unfinished. Just like her feelings, just like this story between her and Liam. Her fingers tightened around the paintbrush. Could she really keep pushing him away forever? The invitation the next morning. Emma arrived at work exhausted. She was halfway through her shift when her phone vibrated. Liam Carter, meet me tonight, please, just one last time. Her heart skipped. One last time. A part of her wanted to ignore the message, but a bigger part, the part that ached for him, couldn't. So against her better judgment, she said yes. An evening of unspoken truths. When Emma arrived at the location Liam had sent her, she gasped. It was a rooftop garden overlooking the city, lit by dozens of fairy lights. The view was breathtaking, but what took her breath away more was him. Liam stood there, dressed in a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands in his pockets, and the moment he saw her, his face softened. You're here. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the relief in it was unmistakable. Emma swallowed. I said I would be. He took a step closer. And yet you look like you're about to run. Her breath hitched. He saw right through her. But before she could respond, Liam held out a glass of wine. Let's make a deal, he said. One night. No running. No overthinking. Just us. Her fingers trembled as she took the glass. Okay, she whispered. Dancing in the moonlight hours passed. They talked. They laughed. They drank wine. Emma hadn't felt this light in years. She had forgotten what it was like to just be. Then soft music started playing. Liam stood, offering her his hand. May I? Emma hesitated. Liam, just one dance, he murmured. Then I'll let you go, if that's what you want. Her heart pounded, but somehow her hand found his. And then she was in his arms. They swayed slowly, the city lights twinkling below them. Emma felt her walls crumble. And when she looked up, Liam was already watching her. Tell me to stop, he whispered. She parted her lips, but no words came out, because she didn't want him to stop, and he knew it. A kiss that changed everything. Liam cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin. You don't have to fight this, Emma. His voice was hoarse, full of something dangerous, something real. Her chest tightened. I'm scared, she admitted. His gaze darkened. Of what? Of falling for you, she whispered. A slow knowing smile touched his lips. Too late. And then, he kissed her. It wasn't just a kiss, it was everything. A confession, a promise, a breaking point. Emma clutched his shirt, losing herself in him. And for the first time, she didn't pull away. She let herself feel. And Liam, he kissed her like he had been waiting for her his whole life. A kiss that shook her world. Emma had never been kissed like that before. Like she was something precious. Like Liam had been waiting his whole life for this moment. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her knees go weak. Her hands clutched at his shirt, desperate to hold on to something, because for the first time in forever, she felt like she was losing control. Liam's arms tightened around her, as if he could feel her hesitation, as if he was silently telling her, I'm here, you don't have to be afraid. But that was the problem. She was afraid, because this felt too real, too intense, too much. And when the kiss finally ended, she couldn't breathe. Liam pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. Emma, his voice was low, rough, filled with something undeniable. She squeezed her eyes shut. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel this. With a sharp inhale, She pulled away. I need to go. Liam's brows furrowed. Emma, wait. But she was already turning, already stepping away, from the warmth of his arms, from the place that suddenly felt too dangerous. And Liam, he let her go. For now. A battle between heart and mind. Emma spent the next few days in a haze. She tried to focus on work, tried to pretend she hadn't felt what she felt that night. But nothing helped. Her heart was at war with her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel Liam's lips on hers, could still hear his voice, his breath, the way he had whispered her name, like it meant everything. And that terrified her, because she didn't know how to handle this kind of love. She had spent years convincing herself that she didn't deserve it. So why was Liam making her question everything? Why did it feel like he was pulling her into a world she had no business being a part of? And why? Why did a part of her want to let him? The confrontation. It had been 5 days since the rooftop, 5 days since the kiss, and Emma had done everything she could to avoid Liam. But fate had other plans. She was in the hospital's break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee, when she heard it. That deep, familiar voice. Are you done running yet? Emma froze. She knew before she turned around. He was there, and when she finally faced him, her stomach clenched. Liam stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes burning into hers. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Liam sighed, stepping closer. I gave you space, he said softly, but I can't pretend like nothing happened. Emma, her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. She could feel her pulse racing. This isn't right, Liam, she whispered, his jaw clenched. Why not? She swallowed. Because you deserve someone who isn't broken. Liam's expression darkened. Don't say that. Emma flinched at the intensity in his voice. You think you're the only one with scars, he continued, stepping even closer. You think I don't have my own fears, my own doubts. She bit her lip. Liam, I don't want perfect. Emma, I want you. Her breath hitched. Liam's gaze softened. Don't push me away, because you're scared. His voice was gentle now, like he was speaking to the most fragile part of her soul. I see you, Emma, and I'm not going anywhere. Tears burned in her eyes, because no one had ever fought for her like this. No one had ever made her feel this wanted. She had spent so long believing she wasn't enough. But Liam was looking at her like she was everything. And for the first time, she wondered, could she let herself believe it? A leap of faith. Emma had always thought love was something that happened to other people. Not her, never her. But as she stood there staring into Liam's eyes, she realized something. She had already fallen. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop fighting it. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached for his hand. Liam stilled. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Liam smiled, lacing his fingers through hers. That's okay, he murmured. We'll figure it out together. And just like that, Emma let herself fall, not just into his arms, but into the possibility of love. A new beginning. Emma had always imagined love as something out of reach, a fairy tale meant for others, never for her. But as she stood there, her fingers tangled with Liam's, she realized something. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was real. This was him. And maybe, just maybe, this was home. Breaking down the walls. For the first time in years, Emma allowed someone in. It was terrifying, but Liam made it feel safe. He didn't rush her, didn't push too hard. He simply stayed. And with every touch, every whispered word, every stolen glance, she felt herself unravel, not in a way that broke her, but in a way that finally made her feel whole. A night under the stars. One evening, Liam took her to the countryside. I want to show you something, he said, his eyes filled with mystery. Emma didn't ask questions. She simply trusted. And when they arrived, she gasped. It was a secluded field, miles away from the city lights. Above them, the night sky stretched endlessly, filled with stars that glowed like diamonds. Emma stood there, breathless. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Liam smiled. "I wanted you to see that some things in life are constant. No matter what happens, the stars will always be there." Emma looked at him, and in that moment, she knew Liam was her constant, a love that feels like forever. They lay on a blanket, side by side, staring at the stars. Liam reached for her hand, his fingers tracing soft circles against her skin. "Emma," he murmured. She turned to him, her heart pounding. He was watching her, really watching her, like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I want you to know something," he continued, his voice low, deep, full of promise. She swallowed. "What is it?" Liam exhaled slowly. "I love you." Emma's breath hitched. The words wrapped around her heart, sinking deep, making her feel everything. "I know you're scared," he whispered, "but I'm not going anywhere. No matter how many walls you build, I'll be here, waiting on the other side." Tears filled her eyes, because no one had ever loved her like this, with patience, with understanding, with a kind of depth that made her feel seen. Emma trembled, but this time, she didn't run. Instead, she leaned in and kissed him, not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of love, real, raw, undeniable. When she pulled back, her voice was barely a whisper. "I love you too." Liam's eyes darkened with emotion, and in that moment, with the stars shining above them, and their hearts entwined forever, Emma finally understood. Love wasn't about being perfect. It was about finding the one person who loved you even in your brokenness. And for her, that person was Liam. The beginning of always that night, Liam held her close. No words were needed, because for the first time in her life, Emma wasn't just existing, she was loved. And in Liam's arms, she had finally found home.